What if I told you that you did not need to study or prepare for 10,000 hours to become an expert at something? Well, it turns out you don't. And there's actual data to back this up. In 2006, journalist Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers, which contained what would later be famously dubbed the 10,000-hour rule. This is the idea that it takes 10,000 hours of practice to become world-class at something. Gladwell argued that this applies to everything from playing an instrument to becoming a master chef, or even achieving fame as an actor or an athlete. The rule basically says that it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, only how much time you put in. But according to a cognitive psychologist named Anders Ericsson, that couldn't be further from the truth. You see, while researching what makes experts different from non-experts, Ericsson found that it's not the total amount of time spent practicing, but rather the quality of the practice that determines whether or not you become good at something. He discovered that there was always 1 hour a day that accounted for most of the progress made by the experts he studied. And this hour was almost always different for each person. Sometimes it would be the first hour of the day before distractions arose. Other times it would be the hour right before sunset when the mind is naturally slowing down. But what they all had in common was that they were challenging themselves during this special hour in ways that they weren't during any other. They would push themselves to do their best work, which led to disproportionate gains in skill and expertise. Anders Ericsson went on to popularize his findings in a book called Peak: Secrets of the New Science of Expertise. And while the 10,000-hour rule has been widely adopted and celebrated, especially within the productivity community, Ericsson's findings are often overlooked. We still spend far too much time trying to calculate how many hours we need to put in, instead of focusing on how we can make the most of the single most important hour of practice every day. So today, I want to share 3 lessons from Ericsson's research that will help you identify and make the most of your own $10,000 hour. Lesson number 1. Deliberate practice is more important than total practice. As I mentioned earlier, Anders Ericsson spent years researching what separates experts from non-experts. And what he found is that it wasn't just the amount of time people spent practicing that determined their level of skill, it was the quality of the practice. He calls this deliberate practice. And it's a structured approach to learning that involves setting specific goals and getting feedback on your performance so you can adjust accordingly. To illustrate this point, consider the Beatles. They practiced for hours every single day for years before they became famous. But do you think that if they had only practiced for 10,000 hours, they wouldn't have become successful? Of course not. It wasn't the total number of hours they put in that made them great. It was how they practiced. By getting on stage and performing in front of live audiences, they were able to get real-time feedback on their music and their stage presence. They then used this feedback to refine their craft, which eventually led them to become one of the most successful bands of all time. So if you want to make the most of your $10,000 hour, you need to focus on deliberate practice. This means setting specific goals for each practice session and getting feedback on your performance so you can adjust accordingly. It also means being honest with yourself about your weaknesses and working on them specifically. Lesson number 2. Focus on the right things. Anders Ericsson found that experts tend to focus on the specific nuances of their craft that make the biggest difference in terms of quality and impact. For example, violinists don't just practice playing the violin. They practice specific techniques like shifting and vibrato that make their playing more expressive and technically proficient. Similarly, chess players don't just practice playing chess. They practice specific tactics and strategies that help them to outmaneuver their opponents. The same is true with whatever it is you're trying to become better at. If you want to make the most of your $10,000 hour, you need to focus on the specific things that will have the biggest impact. This might mean reading more books, talking to more people, or experimenting with new techniques. Whatever it is, you need to be intentional about it. One way to figure out what to focus on is to ask yourself, what are the specific skills or knowledge I need to acquire in order to make real progress? Another helpful question to ask is, what are the biggest obstacles standing between me and my goals? Once you have a clear understanding of what you need to improve on, you can start setting specific goals and expectations for your practice sessions. For example, if you want to become better at public speaking, You might set a goal to practice giving a 5-minute talk in front of a mirror. You could film yourself so you could check your body language, eye contact, and overall stage presence. Or if you want to become better at writing, you might set a goal to write for 30 minutes every day without stopping, even if you don't feel inspired. Lesson number 3. Understand the power of constraints. When we talk about putting in the work, we usually imagine a scenario where we have all the time, energy, and resources we need to achieve our goals. But the reality is that we're often constrained in one way or another. We might not have enough time or money, or maybe we're dealing with a personal issue that's preventing us from making progress. But constraints can actually be a good thing. Constraints force us to be more intentional with our time and resources. They force us to focus on what really matters. This is something that Ericsson discovered in his research. He found that constraints actually helped experts perform better. For example, he found that musicians who played instruments with fewer notes were able to play more accurately and with more emotion than those who played instruments with more notes. This is because constraints force them to focus on the specific nuances of their playing. So if you want to make the most of your $10,000 hour, embrace constraints. Set limitations for yourself that will force you to be more intentional with your time and resources. This might mean setting a specific time limit for each practice session, or deciding ahead of time how much money you're willing to invest in your learning. You could also try imposing other types of constraints, like limiting the amount of information you consume or the number of people you talk to. Doing this is going to force you to focus on the most important aspects of your craft, and it will help you to make faster progress. The key is to find the right balance. You want to impose enough constraints to force yourself to focus, but not so many that you're limiting your ability to learn. If you want to make the most of your $10,000 hour, remember these 3 lessons. First, deliberate practice is more important than total practice. Second, focus on the right things. And third, understand the power of constraints. By following these lessons, you can ensure that you're spending your time and energy wisely as you pursue your goals. And with that said, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, thanks for watching.